thank you for your engagement in that first session, and obviously I'm really looking forward to this session as well. Oh, and the second session, which was morning tea. Well done. Really impressive with that. I didn't mention anything before about evacuation. I don't know if that was mentioned yesterday. I suspect that we've got a number of fire wardens in the room anyway, so you're probably okay with that, and there's green space out there, so we'll probably head for there. It's a bit like with this many fire wardens, like ask a Dutchman for an opinion, you get about 3 of them, and each one of them, when he speaks to them, will speak passionately about that one until he changes his mind, and then speak passionately about. I'm okay to say that with my surname, by the way. So before we get into this next session, Jeannie's just going to come forward and make a really important announcement for us. So please give her your attention. Thanks, Jeannie.
And I'm now going to preach a sermon. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you for giving me a few minutes. I just wanted to let everyone know that this year is CHC's 35th year anniversary. Hallelujah. And a number of you already have teachers and leaders who graduated from CHC. As part of our 35th year, we are going to have a celebration dinner, and that's September 10th. It's going to be at the Lush. It's from 6 to 9. So please spread the word, put that date on your diary. And I would love anyone who would come and say, I'm going to take on getting a table of 10. This is going to be an awesome event just to celebrate what God's done. So can I give a show of hand, anyone who might be interested? Anyone if you're not interested, can you please make sure that you pray about it? Because I will pray too. So thank you. I'll see you there. Please promote it through your schools. We want alums to come back. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeannie. So there's an item for prayer. Lord, should I be interested in going to the dinner? That's great. We're about to head into a really terrific session again now, and we're really privileged to have 2 people presenting now. One of them is here, and one of them is going to be here on the screen. So let me introduce the people and then the topic. I know you've got it in your program, but let's sort of just get our minds and our hearts prepared for what the Lord might say to us in this session. So first of all, we'll be hearing from Rob Lowe. Now, Rob joined Christian Schools Australia last year. Anyone that joins an organisation last year and is still there, I think that's a great effort. He's from Cambridge in the UK, and he had been serving as the CEO of a research foundation, having undertaken the role of a research director. Now, that organisation he founded Relational Schools, which is a project of the Relationships Foundation. So you can see where the topic's starting to go already. Rob graduated from Cambridge Uni in 2001, double first-class honours degree in English, Lit and Ed Studies. Who's impressed by that? English teachers in the room, obviously. All of us. After a year of postgrad study, he went on to teach, which is also, again, an excellent introduction, and then left to do doctoral study with the College of Teachers, now the Chartered College of Teaching. He continues to research, write and speak on the importance of fostering positive relationships between key stakeholders in schools. The topic is around wellbeing. He's the Executive Officer for schools in Victoria and Tasmania. He has a national portfolio role. He's a specialist in organisational culture and community development, and works whilst working in establishing Relationships Foundation for the Asia Pacific office in Australia. His wider role includes working with school leaders, practitioners, a school improvement advisor, a teacher development mentor and coach. So I'm really looking forward to what Rob's got to share. He's coming from a wealth of understanding and practical experience. Straight after Rob, and part of the same session, part of the same topic, we'll be hearing from Helen Hall. Helen's probably known to many of you and maybe in different contexts. There's things, I know Helen really well, but I didn't know some of this, so let me run through this. She's a leader, manager, professional supervisor and researcher. Includes 25 years of work in churches, not-for-profit organisations, global development organisations and tertiary education. She has 4 jobs at the moment. outside of family and so on. Head of Department for Children and Families at Good Life Church on the Sunshine Coast. A sessional tutor at the University of Sunshine Coast. A professional supervisor and trainer with Amavita International, and an independent research consultant. She's passionate about mental health and well-being. And this is an area that we know, as we were talking about yesterday, is increasing in its importance for us to give it attention. Not just to acknowledge it, but to give our reflective attention to. She's doing a PhD that's focused on cognitive empathy in adolescence and how it is linked to pro-social behaviour, social competence, loneliness, and positive well-being. So Rob and Helen are going to run a tremendous session and give us some insight. The title of the session is Empathy at Work, Relationships and Perspective Taking in Organisational Life, Leading and Managing School Cultures. This is a critical topic, and we're very privileged to have Rob and Helen share, and I'm going to hand over to Rob to kick us off. Let's give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me. I hope you can hear this okay. I came into the office today in order to benefit from the better internet speed. I usually get about 700 to 800 megabits per second here, but the wind and the rain is raging outside, and it's certainly disrupted one of our little test moments. So I hope this link will stay strong. I think the more challenging thing is that COVID is having a shot, raging even harder outside. And I'd have loved to have been with you today. It gives me enormous regret as the guy who is the expert in relationships. I can't tell you how difficult it is to communicate in this way. The pandemic has been a time where the very thing that gives us life and strength as human beings, the greatest gift that God gave us as human beings, our relationships one with each other, have now been restricted or prohibited. And even this as a filtering, a mediation of a proper communication makes genuine connection very, very hard. It's why our young people are struggling so much. Not because technology is poor, but it is always impoverished. It can never genuinely connect us in the way that those like Rob Waldinger at the Harvard Development Adult Survey, in his famous study of longitudinal outcomes of mental health well-being of people, demonstrated, as did many others. Study by Helen Pearson, a fabulous book called The Life Project. If you've read that, cohort study of babies since the war, particularly in Scotland, and Susan Pinker's work in the wonderful book The Village Effect. They all show the same things. You can predict longitudinal outcomes of human beings, their physical and mental health, based on the types of relationships they're on, and that's because we've known more probably since 2000 about the way our brains affect our bodies and our bodies affect our brains than we have ever done. We know, for example, that the quality of our relationships can actually turn on and off our gene responses to certain cancers, not whether we get them, but how well we respond to treatment. We know that dementia rates in over 50s men much lower if those individuals are part of a really tight connected cohort. Cohort studies themselves, particularly a very famous one of utility workers in Central Europe, showed that you could actually predict who was going to be alive at the end of a decade based on who was in relationship at the beginning of it. We know this stuff. We know relationships are vital. And why is that the case? Well, that's part of what I want to talk about today. And I'm going to, if I may, just share one of my slides, some of my slides with you now. So I'm hoping that I've now, unfortunately, become a rather smaller box in the corner, but you can see what we're going to talk about. We shouldn't be surprised that relationships are important because at the beginning of the world, as God looks on his creation and he's pleased, everything he creates is good. 7 times that phrase is repeated. It was good, but the first not good of the Bible, and therefore the universe, is what? It's a person without relationship. It's not good, God says, for us to be alone. And why is that the case? Why do we think that's so? Well, it's because I think that we are made in the image of God, and we reflect at our best the plurality of the Creator. It's not a design flaw. There's no suggestion that God messed up. Rather, it's a design feature. We are incomplete without others. And that becomes very apparent when Adam first sees Eve. Do you remember what he says? He says, at last. There's this excitement, there's joy, there's almost relief as he looks on the bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. It's significant, I think, that he doesn't say this is the bone of her bones and flesh of her flesh. What he's really saying here is, I see myself now, or I see myself now. He looks into Eve's eyes and he sees something that complements and completes something of his DNA, but unique. She wasn't a mirror image, she was herself. And as such, he sees himself more fully. The argument here is that because we are made in the image of God, without a relationship, we cannot truly know ourselves until we find another self. And that's true, right? We can't really see ourselves bodily unless it's reflected back in some way. And I can't hear myself authentically until I hear myself recorded. And very few of us like hearing that, do we? Most will say, oh, I hate the sound of my own voice. And that's because when you speak and hear your own voice inside your head, the bones and the tissues, they tend to enhance the lower frequency vibrations. And that means that your voice, well, I'm afraid it usually sounds fuller and deeper to you than it really is. And that's why when you hear your voice on a recording, it usually sounds higher and weaker than you think it should. Our sense of identity is thus distorted, and unsurprisingly, we imagine ourselves as stronger, more complete, more authoritative than in reality we are. And without others, we don't actually know who we are. We need relationships to grow physically, intellectually, spiritually. In African tradition, there is even a word used to encapsulate this and describe this. The word is Ubuntu, and that means I am because you are. And that very concept, those very things that I've started this morning's session with, all that stuff has driven my own personal research, as many of you will know, for nearly a decade now. And thank you for that really lovely introduction. That research is built on this idea that as educators in particular, we are in a unique position to walk with students as they mature in every sense of that word, because that's a social process. That's something that Helen's going to really deep dive into. I'm really excited to listen to my colleague this morning go further into that. And yet the world will tell you, popular opinion would have you believe, that self-identity, self-worth, is internally constructed and conferred, that we alone have the power to validate internal experience. But the Bible says that that's impossible. And social science affirms that view. We are social beings. We are relational beings. Tim Keller puts this beautifully. He says, only if you get love, approval, and esteem from someone you esteem will you ever have self-esteem. Let me say that again. Only if you get love, approval, and esteem from someone you esteem will you ever get self-esteem. It's why we need community around us and specific people to journey with us. It's why we need relationships. That is the framework within which we grow personally and professionally speaking. And it is the mechanism to both be held accountable but also how we effectively carry each other's burdens successfully. That is why you matter as professionals. It's why your relationships with your students matter. It's why your relationships within and across every team in all of our schools deeply matters. But when I talk about a relationship, I have a very specific idea of a definition of it, a construction of it, an identification of it. How might I define relationship? Well, during a distinguished academic career, the Cambridge academic Robert Hind achieved widespread recognition for his work on behavioural development in animals and on relationships within human families, and published more than 30 books, 300 scientific papers on the subject. Hind defined relationships as a series of interactions between individuals who know each other, such that each interaction can be influenced by past interactions and by expectations of interactions in the future. What Hind argues is that where there is a relationship, interaction will be ongoing and therefore different to just chance encounters. If we only ever meet people in isolation and rarely, what we tend to do is just bump around with strangers. And therefore, by relationship, I think we have to assume something that is dynamic, more than a connection, rather a continual process where reciprocal engagement between two people defines the quantity and quality of that relationship. If nothing is taken forward from previous encounters, then you're always just going to be meeting with strangers. So one of the things that I want to do today is explore a framework for understanding that and focus on one of the key drivers of relationship formation to inform and influence the way we conduct ourselves professionally and the way we set up and structure our schools ultimately. So how does that work? Well, in the same way that a prism breaks down white light into its constituent parts, the framework that we developed at Relationships Foundation, the relational proximity framework, breaks down relationships into their different parts. The questions that we ask people in our surveys, the framework that we describe, breaks down relationship into those 5 different aspects of people's experience of relationship. And what I want to do this morning is, first of all, explore those drivers of relationship, but to do so practically, using a worked example. And one of the things I wish to do this morning, and I'm going to bury down into these drivers in a moment, but I want to begin our time by showing you a short advert. And it was an advert made some time ago. The backdrop at the time was a polarised, divided post-Brexit Britain. We live in a world of ubiquitous connectivity where there's countless opportunities to make connections with people, but it's increasingly difficult to make meaningful relationships. And a question that these particular producers of this advert, but particularly the academics they engaged with, was to ask a driving question here, is which was, could you begin to stimulate relationships given the right conditions? And so the beer manufacturer Heineken employed a team of social scientists to design an experiment to encourage people to build relationships where there were deep divisions. And over 3 days, they filmed pairs of complete strangers with polarizing viewpoints to find out if there really is more that unites us than divides us. They devised a series of different exercises based on research from psychology, political science, anthropology, and sociology in order to create a space in which the participants could be themselves. Now, I will give you forewarning before I show this advert that some of this is controversial, but it's not the controversy that I'd like you to focus on, but rather the intentional design features which allowed new and stronger connections to emerge. What lessons can we learn from this today? What lessons can we learn in the days to come? Can we see what we like to call at the foundation a measured pathway that the scientists, the social scientists leading this particular study, created for these participants, this pathway they led them down. Can you see these steps? Can you see the building blocks for successful relationships? Can you see how we might apply this into our own context such that we can really begin to authentically see other and therefore authentically see ourselves? Now, at this stage, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen because what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask the technician in the room to play the short advert live in the room, so it's unadulterated. It's not spoiled by internet signals. So I'm just going to stop sharing now, and I'll show that advert now. Thank you very much.
I would describe my political views as the new right.
I say that I'm left.
Feminism today is man-hating.
I would describe myself as a feminist, 100%.
I don't believe that climate change exists.
We're not taking enough action on climate change.
I think it's about time these people got off the high horse and started looking for credible problems that actually exist.
It's absolutely critical that trans people have their own voice.
That's not right. You can't, you're a man, be a man, or you're a female, be a female.
Women do need to remember that we need you to have our children.
Could I be friends with someone that says a woman's place is in the home?
Right, OK, well, I'm an expert at flat packs. If you've any trouble, just watch me.
So it looks like I've got your instructions here.
I think so.
Let me help you.
It's not just that bit there.
Describe what it is like to be you in 5 adjectives.
Okay, frustrating.
Dedicated.
Opinionated.
Lucky.
Ambitious.
Offensive.
Solemn. I have ups and downs.
Strong.
I want to say attacked, misunderstood.
Name 3 things you and I have in common.
We're both male, we're both confident, and we're both loudly spoken.
We know each other better than people who've known each other for 10 minutes should.
You seem quite ambitious and positive, and you've got this really, got a glow. Do you know what I'm saying? Your aura's pretty cool.
I'm sensing, are you former military or something?
People have said that, but there is no history. So are you then ex-military?
Yeah.
If you're ex-military, I'm very proud of you already.
Well,
So
I grew up in a bit of a rough state. I've experienced homelessness. I've known what it's like to have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely most grateful just for life.
We've only just met, but I think you're the sort of person that would listen to me and we'd have a discussion rather than argue.
Yeah, you could hang out with, man.
let's go. My chance.
Goodness sake.
You're right, mate.
Fitter than I look.
Perfecto.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
So basically, I think we just built a bar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here. Each take a bottle and place it on its corresponding markings on the bar.
Attention, please now stand to watch a short film.
Feminism today is definitely an excuse for misandry, man-hating.
If somebody said to me that climate change is destroying the world, then I'd say that is total piffle.
So transgender, it is very odd. We're not set up to understand or see things like that.
I am a daughter, a wife. I am transgender.
I feel like the battle for feminism definitely isn't done. The fight is never going to be over, if I'm honest with you.
You now have a choice. You may go, or you can stay and discuss your differences over a beer.
I'm only joking.
You had me for a second then.
Well, I'm having a drink.
I'm having a drink.
Yeah.
I want to discuss.
Beer.
Yeah, beer and discuss.
Cheers.
At the end of the day, mate,
About
I've
reaching
enjoyed
out to
working with
people,
you.
yeah. And, even if you wanted to convince people about your point, the productive thing to do would be to sit
It's
down, have a
engage, it's
beer.
engage.
I've been brought up in a way where everything's black and white. But life isn't black and white.
Yeah, I'm just me.
Yeah.
Smash the patriarchy.
I'll give you my mobile number, you give me yours, and we'll keep in touch. I'd have to tell my girlfriend that I'll be texting another girl. She might be a bit upset with that, but I'll have to get round that.
I'll have to tell my girls.
Well, let me share my screen again. That worked. I hope that worked really well. And I hope you can see my slides again. Well, we're going to come back to that advert. I'm going to show it again. But first, let us consider those elements really carefully that I spoke to earlier. What we might call the drivers of relationship. And there are 5 of them. And first of all, there is parity. That is the use of power to promote fairness and enable participation in relationships. The way in which power is distributed and used is a powerful force in relationships. Even when, structurally speaking, relationships are asymmetrical in their design. Let us think of the teacher-student relationship in particular, where the teacher has every right and to command authority within that space, and students should expect to do as they're told. I think that's not a matter for debate. But what we know from the literature is that the very best classrooms are the ones where teachers and students at least perceive themselves to be on a similar level, that teachers have done that work to ensure that the power that is wielded in a class is done so in a way that fosters energy, motivation, commitment, participation. And on the contrary, the corollary of that being used badly is that it creates fear, apathy, creates distance within people. And how we use power when times are tough can instill important truths. Do organisations use their power to squeeze others, or does a value-driven commitment to fairness come to the fore? And I think it's really important that we begin with parity, because one of the driving ways in which the Bible teaches us that we are to be in better relationship with one another comes from, first of all, a desire and a need to drain ourselves of all ill will towards our fellow person next to us. The Bible's really clear on this, that it is inappropriate to see ourselves as being better than the people around us. In fact, we get that beautiful phrase, which gives us our sort of second driving impetus, that beautiful phrase to turn the other cheek, which actually primarily doesn't mean, for those of you who think it means I've just been belted in the jaw, I'm still conscious and I'm ready to offer myself up for another strike. It doesn't primarily mean that. Remember that in the Semitic world, in the Semitic culture, and this was largely a kissing culture. We've lost that art of social contact. Even the handshake now is considered odd. But in that culture, to turn the cheek as you entered a room was to invite or open yourself up, much like the French do, for a warm embrace. It was saying to the people, I am here, I am open for relationship. So it points to the way in which we consider our position to others. We must drain ourselves of ill will towards others. And we must open ourselves up for relationship towards others. Secondly, there is commonality. That is the sharing of purpose and value to create alignment and sense of synergy and unity in relationship. If in shared purpose, it's within that framework of shared purpose that we forge shared identity. Everything flows from this. And even in the case of Tom and Jerry, it is true to say that you can be people who would fundamentally disagree on really crucial things and yet still be able to live together in harmony and work together constructively. Thirdly, there is the importance of communication, the use of direct face-to-face contact in order to create encounter and enable clear, effective communication in relationship one with each other. One thing that, as I said before, online learning and indeed physical separation more broadly has shown us is that temporal and spatial gaps and lower bandwidths of non-face-to-face communication creates risks. It's not just the famous military failures such as the charge of the Light Brigade that are literally fatal. For those of you who know that story, immortalized in Tennyson's very famous poem, that poor brigade were destined to go and dismantle a basically undefended battery position, but they got the wrong message and they attacked a fully armed and fully manned station and were slaughtered. We witnessed in past work in our own healthcare research, for example, how split site working contributes to major service failures and patient deaths. When questions aren't asked, when messages are given inappropriately, advice is not sought, misunderstandings are not corrected. Well, to what extent is that translatable to this context? How do you manage transitions from class to class, teacher to teacher, year to year, school to school? How do you effectively communicate with people in homes when they feel so distant from you? Because communication theorists have looked at factors such as office geography, communication technology, the relational intelligence that enables some people to listen more effectively than others. But at the heart of this is the way in which our presence, physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual, is both mediated across gaps, but also filtered by the ways that we communicate. Just to give you a small example of this, a really amazing study on the importance of touch, relevant in the context of social distancing, illustrates how we're unaware of the bandwidth we use in communicating and so are so poor in managing its reduction. In an experiment, librarians were instructed alternately to touch and not touch the hands of students who were handing back their library cards. And then the students were interviewed, and those who'd been touched, and when I say touched, I mean a fleeting skin contact, no gripping of the hand, nothing memorable. But those students who'd been touched reported a far greater and positive feelings about themselves. Their self-worth improved in studies afterwards, the library, the librarians, the act of reading, than those who had not been touched. And this occurred, as I said, even though the touch was fleeting, the students didn't even remember it. And it's a reminder that decisions to trust, for example, and to connect are rapid, they're unconscious, and they draw on sources that we often forget. But it's not just this idea of this inner work we need to do within us, thinking about our distribution of power, the degree to which we share common goals and value and purpose, the quality of communication. It's all of that over time. And so the fourth driver, the most important driver, as Robert Hines spoke of, is that of continuity. This idea that relationships are a series of encounters. Robert Hines' magisterial work on interpersonal relationships defines them as this series of interactions. History can be a positive foundation of trust, understanding, and loyalty, or it can undermine it as well. Because if the future's uncertain, if people become fearful that there's no future for them at all, then they start to disconnect. And the same is true of our past histories. To what extent can negative histories hold individuals or groups back from building the relationships that they both need and would benefit from? But fundamental to today's discussion, to that example I showed you, and I strongly believe to what Helen's about to talk about, is one of the key drivers in my mind of relationship formation, and that is, contextually speaking, the driver of multiplexity, which is a rather ugly word, which translates or is defined etymologically as the many strands. That a plex is a strand, like a rope. The more knowledge you have about somebody, the more information you have, and the more context you glean them from, the more likely that, like a rope, your relationships are going to be stronger and more robust. I was reminded only this week of the Twin Towers in the scenes from Florida, the collapsed apartment block, or indeed, tragically, the natural disasters in Western Europe this week. And some of the same themes have emerged in people's testimonies in the last few days. It's notable how previous crises like these have prompted reflections on just how well we know the people around us. This was written, a testimony from a neighbour of a 9/11 victim. They wrote, "I stood with you nearly every morning and we greeted each other simply with a head nod and a pleasant hello. I stood next to you for more than 2 years and we never even exchanged names. Always that simple head nod and a pleasant hello. I learned your name after you died. I read it below your photo in the newspaper. I knew of your death earlier, though, as the search for you went on and your fate became more obvious. I would watch your mother walk up and down the street crying. I didn't go out there and introduce myself to her either. I guess I haven't learned my lesson. So now I'm just reminded of you every day by simply looking out my window and seeing your car still unmoved since the day you left for work. I can't say that I miss you, as I never really knew you, but that is the part that I find myself thinking about all the time. Why didn't I get to know you?" And perhaps the more profound question we might ask is, how do you get to know somebody like that? Is there enough context in our interactions one with each other? Is the knowledge we receive authentic? Is knowledge reliable? Is it complete? What are the risks of miscontributions? Well, we don't know. If I could help you, and I wouldn't know what to offer even if I did. What are the risks of misunderstandings? Well, you find out that you don't actually appreciate your circumstances properly, or the impact that you're having on other people, or you're just bogged down with less helpful help. You don't really understand what you need, and you don't understand how people can contribute around you. Just for a moment, just as we're just switching here, I just want to understand the ways in which you see some of these things in your own contexts. What are the risks of poor communication, the risks of really not knowing people properly, both now in the midst of a pandemic and normally? Just take 1 or 2 minutes amongst yourselves, just as I hand over now to my colleague Helen, who's going to take us even deeper into these concepts. Thank you so much.
I really wish he was here. It would have been so much nicer just to flow in from each other, but we've been working really well together over the last little bit. Just to give context, Rob is actually one of my external supervisors for my PhD. I got to know him a few years ago. I got to go to Cambridge and go to the Relationships Foundation's conference, and some of the work that he's doing in the schools with social connectedness and social network analysis, I went, I want you. So we've been working together, and he's one of my external supervisors. I was very happy he moved to Australia. So I have now seen the one who sees me. In Genesis 16, Hagar makes a declaration of both God's character and his name, El Roi, that is lived out through the life of Jesus, and one that we are also called to embody. After experiencing mistreatment and abuse, Hagar has to flee her community and those she calls family. And upon finding herself alone, vulnerable and invisible, God reveals to Hagar his promises for her, and that she is an important part of his creation and his story. She declares, "You are the God who sees me. I have now seen the one who sees me." We continue to see this character of God within the person of Jesus, the one who saw those who were not seen, or heard, listened, and understood. He calls us to live out the same as he commands us to love our neighbour as ourselves. And when he was called to explain what he meant by neighbour, he tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, an outcast himself who was on his way down a path and stopped and saw and understood and then showed compassion to one who was different in so many ways to him, yet similar in his own experience. What we find within these stories of love and mercy is the outworking of one who had vision to see another person, to understand them, to consider their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences, and then be motivated to act. Many of you know me as over the last couple of years that my passion has been the loneliness epidemic. And the UK declared an epidemic of loneliness several years ago. They hired a minister for loneliness. The US have done the same, and Australia's pretty much on its way. And COVID has actually really sort of sped that along. In my research, though, and I did my honours research in that and was published in parental loneliness, and created my own model around loneliness. And what I came to the realisation of is that loneliness, which is defined as perceived social isolation, and it is a perception that it is a gap. It is a gap between what we desire and what we need each individually, and it's different for each one of us. But what we need individually and what we perceive that our world, our relational world is giving us, there's a gap. And it is what I've with all the research and the reading that I have been doing is that I realised that actually it's a feeling of not being seen. And I really started to I was going to do my PhD on loneliness, but I really wanted to drive a little bit deeper. And so I started looking into perspective taking because I have 4 children and they're all teenagers right now. And sometimes I just go, did you consider that actually they didn't text you back because maybe they're busy, not because there's something wrong with you? Did you consider the fact that maybe their parents took their phone off them and I'm about to do the same, but did you consider that there is a reason? Did you consider that maybe there's something going on for that person? That it's not about you and it's not the fact that you're not seen. It might be the fact that they might be struggling and needing to be seen themselves. And so what I did is that I started to look into perspective taking, which is cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy is perspective taking. And what we could see is these silos being formed, and we are seeing it more and more in our society these days. So we know that the research has come out that the iGen generation are the loneliest generation ever to have existed. Generational research by Jean Twang and Conrath have looked into this, and they have done generational research and discovered that this is the loneliness generation. Not only that, but they are also the generation that is the lowest on perspective taking. And so I started to put a couple of things together. Compared with teenagers in previous decades, iGen tweens are less likely to get together with their friends. They're less likely to go to parties, to go out with their friends, to date, to ride in cars for fun, to go shopping in malls, or to go to the movies. And it's not because they're spending more time on work or homework, although they would probably say that, or extracurricular activities. No, they've actually looked into this. Today's tweens hold fewer paid jobs. Homework time is either unchanged or down since the 1990s, and spent time on extracurricular activities is about the same. Today's 10th graders go to about 17 fewer gatherings a year than 10th graders in the 1980s did. Overall, 12th graders are now spending an hour less on in-person social interaction on an average day than their Gen X predecessors. And we're actually seeing this more in a global sphere as well. And you would have seen this with a lot of the political issues that we've been dealing with. I'm really excited that I've discovered this website called All Sides. And what their passion is to actually look at all sides of the issue, and politically and in government and all of those social situations that we're dealing with. And this is an example of one of the things that they discovered. They logged into Twitter. So one of the people as part of All Sides wrote a tweet on the Cuba protests, and then they logged into it from 2 different Twitter accounts. And what came out of it was that Twitter either showed people agreeing or disagreeing with Candace, depending on who was viewing the tweet. So this is the filter and the silos that we are gathering and getting each day when we log onto our phone. And it does help, because we do know that there is so much information out there that, you know, if I'm logging on to Instagram and I want to see stuff around baking and cooking, I don't want to see stuff around boating and fishing. So they know what we like, and they know what we are interested in. But what happens is that when it comes to political issues, when it comes to important issues like Black Lives Matter, like Trump, like all of the like COVID, like vaccinations, what's happening is that we are getting a worldview that is narrow. So this is where my passion comes in, and the power of cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy, just to give you an understanding. So empathy is, in research, split into several things. So we have affective empathy, which is what we typically know as empathy. Affective empathy is when we feel what someone else is feeling. We feel with them. We feel what they're feeling. We understand their emotions. We understand their affect and what they're going through. Cognitive empathy is perspective taking. It is not just noticing that you're wearing different shoes to me, but actually I'm stepping into your shoes. I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to actually stop, and I'm going to actually try and understand your views, your beliefs, what context is going on for you, what's going on for you. Why is your view different to me? Why are you acting the way that you're acting? Why are you responding to this issue the way that you're responding? Sympathy is totally different. Sympathy is feeling for someone. It is not feeling with someone. And compassion is a behaviour, it's an action. It is actually empathy that is acted out. So does that help? Cognitive empathy is perspective taking. So I've just been published, the first part of my PhD, on a systematic review that I did last year on all longitudinal research that has looked into perspective taking, cognitive empathy in adolescence. Why longitudinal? Because perspective taking develops over adolescence. So many of you would know that theory of mind develops in early childhood. It continues to develop. When they hit early adolescence, that's when they really start to cognitively be able to understand that there are multiple views in the world and that someone else's view is different to them. Some of you might be going, really? I haven't seen that. Well, it develops. And what we know is that females are higher than males in cognitive empathy and development on average. What we also know is that it is a continuous thing and that it develops between 13 and 18. What we also know is there's some really important stuff which I'll show later about what that reflects when we get to adulthood. Perspective taking is, and this is my definition after going through a whole lot of research, Perspective taking is a complex cognitive process involving the intuitive understanding of another person's situation and their associated internal state, including their thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and opinions. It's seeing someone else for who they are, who God created them to be, and what's going on for them. The important thing is that it's a key socio-cognitive skill that's important in social interaction because it reduces self-focused thinking and fosters a value and acknowledgement of other people's points of view. And the fact that it's a social cognitive skill means that it can be trained and improved. It is not just a trait that we are born with, it is a skill and a trait that can be improved, which is what I'm in the middle of developing now, is an intervention for adolescents. Generational research has shown that current generation of adolescents are less proficient in perspective taking than previous generations. Many of you might wonder if that social media has something to do with that. The thing is, it actually depends on, the research is mixed on that, and it actually depends on how social media is used. It is more, I think it is a greater, wider thing than just blaming it on social media. And you'll see in a minute why I think that. Adolescence is a development period, as I've said, of perspective taking, and it signifies some important stuff in adulthood. These are the links of what research shows of the power of cognitive empathy when it is used for good. When you have high cognitive empathy, we see in the research higher self-esteem, higher gratitude, lower envy, higher levels of trust and reciprocity in group cooperation tasks, skillful conflict management. All parents of our teenagers say yes, please. Lower risk-taking, pro-social attitudes, moral reasoning and pro-social behaviour, reduced prejudice and bias, less likely to engage in bullying behaviour, but more likely to defend in a bullying situation, and motivation to engage in academic domains. We know that empathy and motivation are connected in the brain. Here's the dark side. If you are high, what we are seeing is that if you are high on cognitive empathy, we can see advantage taking and egoist behaviour in competitive contexts. And we have seen, particularly in girls, relational aggression and manipulation. None of you wouldn't have seen that in your high schools, have you? And malevolent behaviour toward a person whom they felt treated them unfairly. And the question is really, what are they doing with what they know? When skillfully applied, perspective taking can lead to positive social outcomes. However, it has also been shown to be a force that is dark, depending on what their motivation is. So here is some of the research that part of the article, and you can find it on Google Scholar, but so it's moved over, but anyway. The internal psychological outcomes connected to longitudinal perspective taking is that we see low depressive symptoms, and we see self-esteem and less social anxiety. The important one here for you, the school environment, is an important domain connected to the adolescent social world. 3 studies, more cross-sectional research has looked into this, but remember mine was into longitudinal research. 3 studies in this review examined the role of the school climate in relation to adolescent perspective taking, with results showing that the student-teacher relationship and school culture are significantly influential in the development of adolescent perspective taking, in contrast to peer influence. Whilst 2 articles found no significant association between adolescent perspective taking and school factors, it was based on what they measured. And what one article did was found a significant influence in the school culture. So the 2 articles that found no significant association measured the peers' sense of connectedness within a school. The article that found a significant association with longitudinally with a school culture and development of adolescent perspective taking was that it measured the quality of student-teacher relationships, collaboration between student and teachers with a fostering of open relationships, and a school culture that models and communicates empathic responding, openness in relationships, trust and respect, and a fostering of collaborative relationships. And this is what has been found to be more important than a peers' relationships within their class. Additionally, when we look at the parent-child relationship, what we found is actually, and I won't go too much into this, but what you might be interested to know is that when they measure the parent's perspective taking compared to, and the parent relationship with the child, when the parents are one unit, there's no significant association. When they measure the mother and the father as 2 separate people in their relationship with the child, there is a significant relationship, but in different domains. So what we found is that fathers actually have an incredible role to play in the development of perspective taking of the adolescents, because what we can see is that when fathers have a more and demonstrate a more empathic, open relationship that is full of communication and not authoritarian punishment, then we see a higher perspective taking in adolescence. Many of this you probably already understand and know, but when constructive methods are demonstrated to children around conflict resolution, around issues, around consequences for decisions, they have an ability to understand and learn and model what you do as parents, as teachers, as principals. What we also see here is that the outcome of perspective taking in pro-social behaviour. Pro-social behaviour is linked to perspective taking. Why? Because it reduces self-focused thinking. And as the Good Samaritan stopped and saw and understood, pro-social behaviour is us seeing other people. And so perspective taking enables us to look into and see that someone else needs help, and that we are entering into their world, their perspective, their experiences, their views, their emotions, what they're going through. Now here's the interesting thing. Cyber aggression had low perspective taking had a different relationship with cyber aggression than it did when it was relational aggression with peers and romantic couples. They also measured that. The thing about the cyber aggression is that, and as Rob and I have commented a lot, is about the relational proximity. When you're over with cyber aggression, it's different because of the physical proximity and how the relationship is maintained. Low perspective taking actually leads to cyber aggression because of the fact that you can't actually see or understand what someone else is going through. Relational aggression the way that the research is talking about it is that you can see what someone else is going through, but it's about what they're doing with what they know. It's a power thing. And this is the next part. What motivates us? The thing about cognitive empathy is that it is important to know what it is that is motivating the person with what they know and what they see. Foundational research by Ryan and Shim have developed achievement goal theory into social achievement goal theory, and they have looked at the difference between mastery and performance goals within the social domain. They looked at the social development goals, which is mastery, social demonstration approach goals, which is a performance goal, and social demonstration avoid goals, which is actually avoidance of performance. They've taken your typical motivational goal theory and they have researched it within the social domain. Ryan and Shim have highlighted within these, and they have done much research in college students and in school students, and they have seen that the social development goals were linked with higher pro-social behaviour, lower levels of aggressive behaviour, and increased perceptions of positive characteristics in close friendships. Social demonstration approach is found to be significantly linked to perceived peer popularity, increased aggressive behaviour, and decreased pro-social behaviour, supporting previous research indicating that the pursuit of popularity and peer status and acceptance as goals can result in antisocial behaviour characteristics. When students pursue popularity and use their knowledge of how they understand what they're doing can hurt someone else in order for peer status and popularity, and they do it for social demonstration because that is their motivation, that is when we see antisocial behaviour and aggressive behaviour manipulation. Social demonstration avoid goals are positively linked to socially anxious behaviour and solitary behaviour, negatively linked to perceived popularity. Research suggests that social demonstration avoid goals can lead to individuals getting caught in a maladaptive cycle between avoidance of social orientations and poor psychosocial adjustment. Individuals who adopt social demonstration avoid goals have been found to show more anxious solitary behaviour and social worry, increased internalising behaviours, and more depressive symptoms and higher levels of loneliness. It may be that continued orientation towards social demonstration avoid behaviours result in reduced opportunity for social interaction and potential social growth, reducing self-esteem and self-efficacy in response to social situations, and so continue the avoidance behaviours. When they don't feel confident within a social situation, they feel their self-esteem is low and they avoid any negative judgment from others. It is a very self-focused motivation. It's a protective one where they believe that it is better for them to avoid anything, any social interaction, for the fear of negative evaluation and being judged. What happens is that these are the ones that we worry about because they're the ones that get into the internalising and into the psychosocial poor adjustment. It's important to note, though, that the social development goals where they strive to be a better friend, to better understand, to better see someone else, that we see that within our students, when we see that is mastery of friendship, mastery of relationships, mastery of conflict situations, mastery of social situations that are new. It's all about how do we motivate them to understand that by seeing others, that actually that is them mastering social friendships and relationships. And what we also know is that in the bigger picture, there's been longitudinal research done, 23-year study exploring the predictive associations between empathy development and adolescence, and then reported social competencies and outcomes in adulthood at the age of 35. The predictive variable of adolescent empathy was measured between the ages of 12 to 16, and then at 35 they were measured. Social competencies at 35 were measured as empathy and communication skills and relationships. The empathy slope predicted a higher standing on empathy, communication skills, and perceived social integration at 35. In other words, those participants who increased in empathy across adolescent years perceived themselves as being more empathic and socially integrated in adulthood compared to those who decreased in empathy during adolescence. They also tended to report higher levels of communication skills that are important in conflict situations. We want functioning adults who can manage and can lead a society that is more divided than ever. We want to be able to develop cognitive empathy within our adolescents, within our children, within the next generation, so that we have people who know and lead with an understanding of different perspectives, who know how to see others. So as I finish up, really the sum of it is there are two questions at the heart of it. Two, who do we see? I mean, who do we really take time to see? Who do we stop and see beyond our vision with our eyes, and we see with our intuition, our senses, our hearts, our understanding? Who do we stop to notice and see? And then what do we do with what we see? What can we encourage the next generation to do with who they connect with, who they see, and what they do with what they see? Back to you, Rob.
Just such a great deep dive and such provocative questions as well, to take us into our sort of time of practical application. You asked two great questions. You know, what is it that we can do with what we see? What do we do with what we see? And an encouragement as well that sociocognitive, our ability to develop the sociocognitive is real. It can be trained, it can be encouraged, but it is really through my research, and you'll forgive me because of course I'm a social scientist, and I'm really interested in the context we develop such that those skills and capacities can be developed within us, which is why we're just going to go into that time of application. Now, I probably won't re-show, given our timing here, I won't re-show the advert that I showed you before, but I would like you, or maybe I should. Look, what I want you to know is that the absolute core of that particular experiment, the reason it was done, the reason we begin to consider those building blocks of formation is because that they are replicable. That certainly was true of Chris Brower, who was the Director of Innovation at Goldsmiths University in London, who designed the experiment, an expert in human behaviour. The premise was simple. can you really create proximity when you know there to be existing division? What Browse said was that the absolute core of the common ground is in the need to truly hear the interests and concerns of another person. He said that highly open people are positively perceived and appreciated by others, seen as influential, humorous, and expressive, and have happier relationships and more successful careers. After you listen, then listen some more. A prerequisite for relational formation is being established. What's clear is one has to be intentional. Foundations have to be laid. And that's why these drivers, from our perspective, are so important, that if you can get these 5 drivers or preconditions for relationships in place, then what you can encourage is mutual respect, shared identity, connectedness, belonging, mutual understanding. You can create synergy between people. So what the team did in order to try and develop that was to design an experiment together with Dr. Govinda Clayton, a conflict resolution specialist. But regardless of planning, it's always a gamble when you film an unrehearsed and unscripted piece like this. You never know what you're going to get. So you can imagine when each pair met each other for the first time, on the days of filming of this particular advert, they all had their noses, the social scientists that is, they all had their noses pressed to the monitors to see what would happen. They were confident, though, that when you give people the chance to get to know each other without seeing merely a label, everyone can connect. The only control they had was some written instructions for the pairs to follow, and the occasional guidance from the director on a loudspeaker if they got stuck on a task. That said, there was clearly an underlying rationale behind this. The steps they took them through, the phases of the research were carefully thought through. I wonder, as we watch this, can you see those phases though? Can you see how the drivers of relationship, as we might understand them, were adhered to? So I think we will do this. We're going to watch the advert again, but this time I want you to actively listen. You've seen and understood the types of things that drive relationship. Remember those again, the degree to which we can know people in context and in different contexts. How do we tease out knowledge of other? How do we encourage and increase face-to-face communication? How do we build logically, phase on phase? How do we build that continuity of relationship? What steps must we take people through? How can we establish common goals, common values, common shared purpose? How are those things encouraged in this advert? Can you spot any of the things that the scientists pre-built into this task to encourage those behaviors, capacities, skills to emerge? Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm just going to ask my colleague to play the advert again. But before I do, one of the things that I wanted to do is give you a worked example, just give you a sense of some of the things I might be looking for. So which driver or domain of relationship is important to the team here in this moment? What is the impact of bringing 2 individuals into the room simultaneously down individual pathways, but getting to a point at the center where they converge? What's the impact of this? What's the significance? How might it change the posture or mindsets of the people? Well, here, this is very much linked to that first driver relationship, that of parity. In this instance, both the participants have to recognize they are of equal worth. Someone at the point where they meet in the middle of that guided line is going to have to yield. Someone is going to have to recognize that they will have to go second, go last. How do we encourage people to see life in the same way? It's a small thing at that moment. They've both come in as equals, but at some point, already within that first 30 seconds, they're going to have to decide who is of greater value. Someone's going to have to be the better person there. It's a small thing. It has a huge impact because it already sets tone and patterns the relationships. Well, what other things could you see or did you see? It's your turn. How many can you find? I'm going to show the advert shortly. It's just a 3-minute advert, and then a time for discussion and hopefully an opportunity to feed some of those things back. Here I go. Your turn. Let us hope we can see the advert again. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and hopefully you can see it. Thanks very much.
I would describe my political views as the new right.
I'd say that I'm left.
Feminism today is man-hating.
I would describe myself as a feminist, 100%.
I don't believe that climate change exists.
We're not taking enough action on climate change.
I think it's about time these people got off their high horse and started looking for credible problems that actually exist.
It's absolutely critical that trans people have their own voice.
That's not right. You can't, you know, you're a man, be a man, or you're a female, be a female.
Women do need to remember that we need you to have our children.
Could I be friends with someone that says a woman's place is in the home?
Right, OK, well, I'm an expert at flat packs. If you have any trouble, just watch me.
So it looks like I've got your instructions here.
I think so.
Let me help you.
It's not just that bit there.
Describe what it is like to be you in 5 adjectives.
Okay, frustrating.
Dedicated.
Opinionated.
Lucky.
Ambitious.
Offensive.
Solemn. I have ups and downs.
Strong.
I want to say attacked, misunderstood.
Name 3 things you and I have in common.
We're both male, we're both confident, and we're both loudly spoken.
We know each other better than people who've known each other for 10 minutes should.
You seem quite ambitious and positive, and you've got this really, got a glow. Do you know what I'm saying? Your aura's pretty cool.
I'm sensing, are you former military or something?
People have said that, but there is no
Really?
history. So are you then ex-military?
Yeah.
If you're ex-military, I'm very proud of you already.
Well,
So
I grew up in a bit of a rough state. I've experienced homelessness. I've known what it's like to have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely most grateful just for life.
We've only just met, but I think you're the sort of person that would listen to me and we'd have a discussion rather than an argument.
Yeah, you could hang out with, man.
let's go. Mind chatting?
Goodness sake.
You're right, mate.
Fitter than I look.
Perfecto.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
So basically, I think we just built a bar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here you are. Each take a bottle and place it on its corresponding markings on the bar.
Attention. Please now stand to watch a short film.
Feminism today is definitely an excuse for misandry, man-hating.
If somebody said to me that climate change is destroying the world, then I'd say that is total piffle.
So transgender, it is very odd. We're not set up to understand or see things like that.
I am a daughter, a wife. I am transgender.
I feel like the battle for feminism definitely isn't done. The fight is never going to be over, if I'm honest with you.
You now have a choice. You may go, or you can stay and discuss your differences over a beer.
I'm only joking.
You had me for a second then.
Well, I'm having a drink.
I'm having a drink.
Yeah.
I want to discuss.
Beer.
Yeah, beer and discuss.
Cheers.
At the end of the day, mate,
About
I've
reaching
enjoyed
out to
working with
people,
you.
yeah. And, you know, even if you wanted to convince people about your point, the productive thing to do would be to sit
It's
down, have a
engage, it's
beer.
engage.
I've been brought up in a way where everything's black and white, but life isn't black and white.
Yeah, I'm just me.
Yeah.
Smash the patriarchy.
I'll give you my mobile number, you give me yours, and we'll keep in touch. I'd have to tell my girlfriend that I'll be texting another girl. She might get a bit upset with that, but I'll have to get round that.
I'll have to tell my girls.
Well, cheers. Smash the patriarchy. I'm going to ask you now to have just 2 or 3 minutes with the people around you, next to you. Tell me the sorts of things that the social scientists did in order to encourage those types of relationships to change and reform. Go for it. Just talk amongst yourselves. Thanks very much. Just 2 or 3 minutes. Well, we could spend a good deal of time going through this, and it would be wonderful to have a more interactive dialogue. But it is one of those things that's very hard when you're not in the room to be able to sort of do genuine discussion, genuine interaction. Being apart from one another, I think you'll find, and I hope you'll see, is extremely challenging. I'm just going to share my screen now. It is a very real thing for me today. It's the 20th of July, 2021, and that means that 70 years ago today, my mother was born, and I received photographs from my dad last night of them spending some time with family yesterday, and we were due to go and be with them this week and celebrate a person who deserves to be affirmed. My mother has sacrificed so much for me and our family, and I am struggling not to be there to be with her today. When we are separated, it creates very unusual things within us internally. But what we've shown here, but when you increase proximity between people, when you increase the bandwidth between people, so you can increase and improve and enhance the quality of their interaction and engagement. What you'll have noticed was perhaps these things. You may have noticed others, but I just thought I'd highlight as we close the impact of giving somebody else the instructions. There was a need right from the start to recognize that this task wasn't the same, that you really needed to see what was a challenging construction task from another point of view. And when we actively, as Helen said right at the start, most powerfully, I think, this isn't merely an empathy of, but a walking with. And when we genuinely place ourselves in somebody else's shoes and see something from their perspective, how differently we feel about them as a person, as an individual. What was the impact of asking the participants to describe themselves in 5 adjectives? And not just adjectives that they would use to describe themselves, I hope you noticed, but 5 adjectives that they might think others use to describe them. They were both asked to be vulnerable, to share emotions, characteristics of who they were as people, but they also asked them immediately to take that step and think as others think, to see themselves as others see them, and not merely to be introspective at that point and that moment. And what powerful emotions and responses it elicited. The gentleman who describes himself as solemn, the recognition that people are going through very challenging times. And also to actively ask them to name 3 things that they all had in common, to remind themselves and to focus on the things that unite and not divide as a prerequisite for a relationship foundation and formation. And a recognition that you can't even begin to build a bar or a bridge until the foundations have been established, that there are incremental steps that you need to go through in order to make relationship work. Those bridges will never hold. They won't remain, and particularly when storms come, they're very fragile and susceptible to falling in those moments. And lastly, and perhaps most powerfully, the impact of asking somebody to stand for a short announcement. You'll have noticed that prior to this particular task, they've taken all these individuals off and asked them a series of questions to camera. They never knew, of course, what it would mean, what it would take, or what it would mean for them to be recorded, that they'd never show them. And of course, what was the impact of having those revealed in front of the other? Well, it really revealed a new and authentic self to the point where there was nothing left to hide. And when we open that bandwidth, as I said, when we really encourage a revelation of who we are to other, so we can start and build a different kind of relationship together. That is the way I think, but I'm going to invite Helen to speak to this now as well, the way in which Helen's field and discipline interact so neatly and beautifully with mine. It's a privilege to be working with Helen on her PhD study. And I think this has been a great and thought-provoking session, which asks you to consider new and fresh insights into a very challenging topic, but also practical ways we might think of applying that into our own context, such that we can build different and more complex and nuanced relationships, both within our organisations and between them. Thank you very much.
To Rob and Helen, I want to sincerely thank you. I think this has enabled us to go deeper on a topic that is really important. And the reason I say that is I actually think this area is a wonderful opportunity for the gospel. Individualism and consumerism is imploding on itself. And our society and our communities are bearing the weight of a failed paradigm. I really believe that. The biblical message of our formation, our deep need for emotional connections as part of who we're made to be, is actually, to me, it's a clear distinction for us in our schools. And when our schools are talking about formation in the complete sense, being moral formation and spiritual formation as well as intellectual and utility, I think this is an opportunity that Christian schools are moving into in terms of teaching, I use that word carefully, helping students to learn what it means to be deeply human by understanding our formation and our gospel. So I think instead of just talking about, the difficulties now because kids are lonely or kids are not finding their own sense, I think to go into this topic today and to think about it more deeply in our context of how this becomes part of the narrative of formation for our young people and how we look for opportunities to teach and help students to learn great skills, listening, perspective taking, and so on. So it's wonderful. It's a really beautiful thing to engage in. And ideas. So thank you, Helen. Thank you, Rob. Sincerely, can we show our appreciation to them again, please? Helen, we have a small gift for you. Rob, we have a gift for you as well. I once again accept that on your behalf. That's 2 for me today, which is lovely. But thank you, Helen, for the time I know it takes into not just doing the work you do, but to be able to compartmentalise it and deliver it today. So thank you very much. Yeah. And I hope Rob was able to hear our appreciation. I think that was a wonderful articulation of the work that he's doing that's obviously forming over a long period of time. It's lunchtime now, time to recharge, a time to move, and perhaps even as we were learning yesterday, get the outside parts of our brain getting a fresh flood of blood. And we'll be back in just under an hour, so 1 o'clock we reconvene. Thank you.